Nick Saban is retiring.
Wow.
Head coach at Alabama is retiring. He's just informed his team that he is stepping away from the program. Let me find the 6 national titles at Alabama. And he is retiring from football. Just told the team, according to Chris Lowe. Massive. Now that's a ripple effect across college football.
Yes, it is.
So the entire saga of what they went through this season, where he seemed like he was out of it, wasn't into it, and then finishes with one of the best coaching performances, if not the best, that we've seen from him at the University of Alabama. He is now retiring after 6 national championships and a team that's going to be really good next year. Really good.
Oh, yeah.
And a conference that's ushering in Texas and Oklahoma as we go into the next era of college athletics, the NIL era, and the super conference is on the horizon. He is stepping aside and retiring from football.
Well, and there was so much talk last year about him looking like a guy who was on his way out, not this season, but the season before, looking like a guy who was on his way to retirement. Then this season started. They lose by 10 at home to Texas, and then all the rumblings got started again. Oh, maybe Nick Saban, this is last year, maybe he's on his way out. And then they rallied big time and won the SEC and got back to the college football playoff.
So let's tweet this out. Let's get this link going
And
here.
now he's out. So we're going to have big reaction to this throughout the rest of the show. Hutton, my first thought is, just like I said, wow, I'm incredibly surprised. My second thought is Nick Saban even did this where Alabama remains at a competitive advantage by going through, and I know he had the college football playoff also,
right,
and had to wait for that, but really got through the recruiting process and transfer, the biggest part of the transfer window with this, setting the team up really well, where whoever inherits this team is going to have high expectations next year. And then the obvious question, who succeeds him at Alabama? Who's the next Alabama head coach? Does Nick Saban decide that? Have they already decided that? Is there a plan for his replacement, or is this going to be the standard, hey, we're going to conduct a national search, and then we're going to hire a coach?
So I immediately think, I'm still like, I can't believe it when I'm reading this. I was doing double check because the blue check mark means nothing now on some of these accounts. But Chris Lowe and everyone's now going through the breaking news, informing the team that he's just retired from college football. So retiring at the age of 72, 6 titles. You have the immediate question I have, Chad, is what's next in retirement? Is it more than just stepping away from the game and not wanting to have another role? Is it the commissioner of college football that we have been discussing for the last couple of years, and what college athletics needs? Leadership, a direction, someone as the face of the sport as we go into this new era. I also think the new era has a lot of coaches wanting to get out. Saban wasn't one of them. He's always adapted to what was in front of him. For several seasons, he would complain about the style of offense, right? The bootleg and the mobile quarterback, all this. It
was unsafe.
Unsafe.
The speed of the offenses, how quickly they were playing, it was unsafe.
Down. And then what do we see now? He's totally adapted that. We didn't think of the quarterback at Alabama, even with Saban, until we started to see things roll through over the last, 5, 6 years, 7 years plus, where they have had quarterback after quarterback in this lineage of top talent. They had not had a quarterback win the Heisman, and they've got it now. They were known for the run game and defense, and Saban's known for dominance, known for adapting and winning. So while I don't think it's certainly the era that we're ushering in that's running him off, I am surprised that he is going out this way instead of the way I think we all assumed where it's in his blood, and once it's not a part of his life, he's done.
I kind of feel this way about Peyton Manning. If Peyton Manning gets into a president role for an NFL team and he's not doing Peyton Manning things, not doing a Manning cast, not doing documentary series on ESPN or whatever it is, I feel like that kind of robs the public of Peyton Manning. I think that what Nick Saban should be is czar of college football if they have that role, the head of college football. I also feel like Nick Saban is going to be so good on television if he fully commits to that we're almost being robbed if he's in a position where he's only giving a press conference once every 6 months and not out public forward-facing in college football. College football probably needs a Nick Saban to run the sport and be the manager, president of the sport. But I want Nick Saban on TV. Selfishly, as a sports fan, I want to see Nick Saban commenting on all things college football somewhere, someplace. I hope that's what happens, but I don't know if that's going to be the future for him or not.
6 titles at Bama. He had 1 at LSU. And keep this in mind. This is also we're in this time frame where we could also see Bill Belichick do the same thing. That's another option for Belichick. We could have the greatest coach in pro football
and college football retire within the same week.
Yep,
that's crazy. It's man, I'm
stunned. I mean, again,
we're gonna have plenty of time to talk about what's next at Alabama, but I'm just gonna throw this name out there, Dabo Swinney.
Okay.
After the season that he had at Clemson, 2 questions on this: would Alabama still want Dabo Swinney right now, or would they see him as a coach that's on the decline? Or do you say it's a no-brainer? This guy has won multiple national championships at another place. He is an Alabama graduate, played here for Gene Stallings at Alabama. You bring that guy home, and you go from Nick Saban to Dabo Swinney. And it's as simple as that if you're Alabama.
I don't think it's that time now. I think that time has passed.
That window may have come and gone for him.
2 things come to mind. Number one, I mean, this is the greatest era that this run of dominance where you just see nothing but titles. And if you lose 2 games in the season, you're going through a rebuild, a retool, I think is what he called it. Who's the best coach now in college football? Kirby Smart.
Minus the scandal, it's Jim Harbaugh, but he's about to go to the NFL.
Right. So
it's, Kirby, after Kirby Smart, I think Dabo Swinney's got the track record, but he's not been as good lately, but he's right up there.
What are Alabama fans doing right now?
I mean, they're probably they're not burning a couch. I don't think you do that when a coach retires. A good couch burning that happened in Ann Arbor after Michigan won the national title.
I think there's just
silence. Video of that one.
Silence in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, I think it's all about the next coach now. But Alabama fans have had so much success in football with Nick Saban that I'm sure that they're very confident that this thing's going to keep rolling along.
And what is the ripple effect of this? Because Bama is going to have a new coach. If they go from the outside and go big, who do they go with? Michigan is also going to have a new coach. The thought is it's going to be Sharon Moore if Harbaugh leaves, if and when Harbaugh leaves. Who's the next money guy? Clay's asking if it's Dan Lanning. You know he's going to be mentioned, but he just signed another contract.
That's one that I thought about also.
Lane Kiffin wants his name mentioned.
Yeah.
There's plenty of coaches that want to be I thought Texas A&M was going to be the rags to riches for the $4 million head coach that's turning into the $12 million head coach.
Clay wants to hop on and talk Saban with us.
Let's
also.
do it. Yeah.
So if we can call him, let's
get him on.
Let's do that. He just sent a text and said, "Call because he wants to get on and talk some Nick Saban."
There has to be a reason why now. The timing of this.
We found this news out, by the way, the same time you guys did on air on the show. So we're processing all this also. A name I threw out for NFL jobs that I'd throw out for Alabama too is Kalen DeBoer, and what he's done at Washington. That seems like a guy. Alabama's not going to want, Lane Kiffin comes to mind who's been there. That's not ever going to happen. They're never going to bring on a Lane Kiffin that's going to bring that type of attention the way Lane Kiffin does. Alabama's not going to be about that with their football program. Kalen DeBoer would fit the mold of someone they'd be looking for.
Again, Nick Saban has announced he's retiring, announced his retirement. Look at his career. He's 297 wins, 71 losses, and 1 tie. 7 national championships, 6 at Alabama. Chad, what comes to mind, too, the conversation that we were having at the beginning of the season, and it ran through even the Tennessee matchup. Post-game of the Tennessee matchup, he's got the cigar. You've got Milroe and others that are kind of laughing at that because he hates cigars. He sprints over to the student section after the win. He's enjoying the moments there. And I think the sentiment was, hey, he's not losing his mind as much as he was in past seasons. I'm trying to read into it.
Yeah.
Clay Travis joins us. Clay, are you as stunned as we are today?
Yeah, I mean, how long ago did I hang up with you? 15 minutes ago.
Yeah.
I am sorry, I'm in my car driving to go get my kids at school. When I saw the news, Chris Lowe, give him credit for one of the big, truly incredible breaking news stories out there. I had to check, in this day and age. I was like, I follow Chris Lowe. And
Me too.
We just talked about doing the same thing to make sure we weren't getting fooled. By a fake account.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, when you're live like you guys are, but also when you're just, out there. Like I try to avoid sharing anybody who's obviously not the real person. And so it was such a quick tweet. I had to make sure it was right before I wanted to retweet it. But look, I mean, Nick Saban is alive, right? So let's preface that, because a lot of times when guys coach who have had a tremendous career or guys retire, I feel like we talk about them as if they have died. It's like we're doing a eulogy. So he seems to be still a healthy guy. Obviously, I think probably still has a lot of good years of life left. But this does not surprise me. And it doesn't surprise me because, and I don't, I got a lot of opinions. Some of them end up right. Some of them end up wrong. I said on my show and I tweeted out, I've watched Nick Saban for the last, 20 years coaching in the SEC and at the Miami Dolphins like everybody else has. And this year felt different. It felt to me like Saban, as much as he could, was having a stop to smell the roses style season. Just because he didn't react and lose his mind on the sideline.
He was different. Right, Clay?
Yeah.
Like, he was just different. We all said that. Oh, he really likes this team and this group because he's smiling now and he's joking around more with reporters. It's been different the last year and a half.
We didn't have the moments where he's ripping into the reporters post-game. Yeah. You're right.
I mean, and it was so un-Saban-like, and I'm not saying that he still didn't have emotional meltdowns on the sideline. I mean, a tiger can only change its stripes to a certain extent. But it felt to me like this was his swan song, that he had made the decision and he was trying to enjoy the final moments of his coaching career. And let's put it into context here. I think Nick Saban is the greatest college football coach of all time. And I'm not just saying that hyperbolically because suddenly he is retiring. I've thought it for a while. I made the argument that he was the most dominant, and I questioned whether he would coach long enough to be the best. But I think when you consider 7 national championships, 6 at Alabama, 1 at LSU, and this is the stat that stands out to me the most, and confirm that I'm right about this, obviously, because I'm driving to pick up my kids at school. But I believe Alabama was number 1 at some point in time in 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. I don't think they got to number 1 in 2023, although I could be wrong, and they could have been number 1 this year as well. You guys can fact check that, like I said, because I'm driving. The reason why I point that out is, if you talk to people who have success in the world of coaching, in the world of business, in the world of life, having success is not the hard thing to do. Sustaining success is the hard thing to do. I don't believe we will ever see any coach in any of our lives, in any of the lives of anyone that is listening right now, even if you've got a 5-year-old and you're playing this audio for somebody who's 5 years old in your car right now, I don't believe anybody will ever do that in college football again. I don't think anybody will ever be as dominant as Nick Saban was during his run at Alabama. For a lot of programs, getting to number one ever is incredible. For a lot of coaches, winning a single national championship is incredible. And so for what Nick Saban did during his tenure at Alabama, in conjunction with the national championship at LSU, I don't think anybody has ever been better as a college football coach. That includes Bear Bryant, that includes Bobby Bowden, that includes anybody that you can go through the list. And I should say in the modern era, right? I mean, I'm not an expert on 1924 offensive football or anything like that. But I think in the modern era of football, as it became a big business, as it became hyper competitive, as everybody was spending tens of millions of dollars to attain championships, no one has ever been better as a college football coach than Nick Saban.
And Clay, well said. And you look at Saban's tenure, I don't know that we're ever going to have the Nick Saban set up to that legendary career again because of just where we are now in coaching. Think about this Nick Saban that Alabama got and Alabama hired. A guy who'd already won a national title at LSU, a guy who tried the NFL and realized he did not like it and wanted to get out. So he had that hunger to get back into something he knew he could succeed at, and that was college football. And then he lands at Alabama, this tradition-rich program that was perfect marriage for 16, 17 years. He stays at Alabama to go on to that career. I just can't envision a future where we get that same setup of a guy who, coaches at Kent State and coaches in the NFL with Bill Belichick and coaches at Michigan State, then LSU, then goes to the NFL, realizes he doesn't like it as a head coach there, then lands at Alabama. It's hard to think about another coach on that same trajectory to where you get that 16, 17-year window of absolute brilliance.
Yeah, and I think another couple of things that I think that's well said too. I think it's not a coincidence that Saban is leaving, not only at this age, but I wonder if NIL hadn't become an issue, whether he would have stayed another. The game of college football is changing. The reason why Nick Saban left the NFL was because he wanted to have complete and total control of his program. That's why he didn't necessarily like the Miami Dolphins, where the athletes on the team who are professionals all make more money than you at the top line, and you don't have that much control as a head coach. And suddenly now in college football, you've got to be a GM, and you've got to negotiate NIL deals, and you have to compete. Remember Nick Saban being upset about the Texas A&M allegations that he made that Jimbo Fisher got all fired up about in the last couple of years. I think that factors in here. I think the next question that needs to be asked, again, Nick Saban contextually, I think the greatest college football coach of all time. Where does Alabama go now?
Yeah.
If you were athletic director, the timing on this is interesting. He went through the early signing period, right? So he signed another elite class that all thought they were playing for Nick Saban. That feels a little bit unfair to me, by the way. Maybe he didn't know officially that he was going to step down. Maybe he thought the SEC title game against Georgia was going to be his final game. And didn't necessarily expect his team to win that game. And certainly he would have liked, I'm sure, to be raising that crystal above his head and winning another national championship as opposed to losing to Michigan and Jim Harbaugh. But he signed all those guys. Look, 3 names that immediately come to mind for me. Maybe I should add a fourth. Dan Lanning at Oregon. I think he's young. He's dynamic. He's recruited at a really high level based on his background. I think Dabo Swinney, certainly, who's a former University of Alabama player. Remember, Bear Bryant went back to Alabama. He said, when mama calls, I'm paraphrasing him, but you answer, like you go back. That legacy of Alabama football, everybody had to be connected to Bear Bryant for a long time. Will we now see the new legacy of where you're connected to Nick Saban, maybe? Or is it just, hey, we won another stud? Dabo's won multiple national championships. If this were 2 years ago, I think it'd be a no-brainer. Clemson has stumbled a little bit. Maybe the bloom is off Dabo a little bit more than it otherwise would be. I'll toss out Steve Sarkisian. Tremendous success as an offensive coordinator at Alabama, now at Texas. Hard to think that he would leave one job like that for another. And then Lane Kiffin, just down the road at Ole Miss, obviously another former offensive coordinator at Alabama. Those are 4 names currently associated with with college football that immediately would come to mind if I were Greg Byrne, the AD at Alabama. That would be on my list that I would be trying to make contact with to see. Remember, also, I believe I'm correct in this. Kevin Steele just retired a couple of days ago as well, right? The defensive coordinator at Alabama. Not a lot of happiness necessarily with the current offensive coordinator at Alabama, Tommy Rees. You guys can fact check me on this if I'm wrong on any of this, as I'm driving, like I said, to go pick up my kids, or if I lose you for some reason.
Got you.
But like many people out there, I am, reacting in real time to news that just broke in the last few minutes. That's the way that I would kind of be processing it if I were athletic director and had to make a decision about going forward with who would be the head coach at Alabama. Remember, the job is going to be a great one. Jalen Milroe's not going pro. He's coming back. You got an established quarterback there. And all of that certainly is in play as you try to analyze where Alabama goes from here. As remember, we're headed into a new era in college football, with this being already now turning the page and thinking about what the 12-team college football playoff will look like.
Yeah, but in Bama, they got a great team returning, top 5 caliber team every year. They're playing road games next year at Wisconsin, Tennessee, LSU, and Oklahoma. Got a home game against Georgia next season. I mean, it's a big season coming up. And the ripple effect, I'm listening to you, Clay, list off the names. The ripple effect for those programs, if hypothetically one of those guys is the next head coach, what that means across college football. I mean, the landscape of college football just changed today with Nick Saban retiring from coaching. And
unless they go to the NFL, there's going to be major implications with other big-time programs wherever they go.
And the reality is, even if they go to the NFL, if I am Jimmy Sexton, if I am a college football or NFL coaching agent, I want to get the idea out there that my guy's in the running to be the next head coach at Alabama. Because even if he's not, I might get a paycheck because my school's afraid that he might leave. Like if I'm repping Lane Kiffin right now, boy, I just went and bought a new lake house because you just tossed out the idea that he might go. Dan Lansing at Oregon, whatever he's making, he's going to get a raise if he's not in play. And these are just the guys that I'm thinking of off the top of my head that would be right at the top of the list. Dabo has been a lot of Clemson people have been down on Dabo of late. All of a sudden, if you think about him riding off into the sunset, maybe Dabo's got some contract leverage there, to say nothing of Sarkisian at Texas. This is a bombshell. And we should mention also Pete Carroll stepping down, 2 of the lions, not only of college football, but just coaching over the last generation for anybody who is a big football fan. But
we could have, in the same week, we could have Bill Belichick news too. I mean, Bill Belichick, greatest coach in pro football.
2 greatest in each sport.
And you have the great Nick Saban in college football with Belichick 71, Saban 72, Pete Carroll 72, and having all that news at once is crazy.
I mean, it is it's a bombshell, and again, I'm not stunned that it happened, but when somebody has been dominant for as long as Nick Saban has been, you just anticipate that they're never going to leave after a while. And I think it's fair to say Saban's leaving close to on top, right? I know he lost in the playoff to Michigan, but I think if you had told Alabama fans in the immediate aftermath of the loss to Texas, hey, Alabama's going to win the SEC title and they're going to go to the playoff, but they're going to lose in the first round, would you sign up for that? I think just about every Alabama fan with a functional brain, admittedly, there are a lot of them that don't have functional brains, but just about every Alabama fan with a functional brain would have said, oh, yeah, I'll sign up for that in a heartbeat.
Another name that just popped to mind immediately and would have been a good choice had he not gotten the job he wanted last year, D'Amico Ryans, who's an Alabama alum. Was a name that popped to mind.
If he lost this weekend in the playoff game, now obviously they're playing the Browns right on Saturday, he might be in the mix. And if I was D'Amico Ryan's agent, I would float his name because I don't know what he makes at the Texans, but with C.J. Stroud and making the playoff, I know most people would always be happy with doubling their salary. So even if he loves his job with the Texans, I would think he would be in a position where that would be a conversation he'd want to have too.
Well, what do you think Bama fans are doing right now, Clay? What's going on at Innisfree?
I would say one, I mean, Alabama fans are probably intensely grateful for Saban. And if you had set an over-under when Saban left the Dolphins to come to Alabama, I think most people would have set the over-under at 4.5 years. I mean, the idea that Saban would finish his career at the University of Alabama, I think would have been a very low likelihood in terms of most people's opinions. Certainly, I didn't think Nick Saban would have the success he had at Alabama, but I also didn't think he would stay as long as he has. I think most people would have agreed that was unlikely. But I think Alabama would believe that they've got a team in place that if they go make the right hire, that this is going to be a transition akin to when Brett Favre left and Aaron Rodgers took over as quarterback in Green Bay. Alabama fans are cocky at this point. I expect that they will believe that they are just going to go from one Hall of Fame coach to another Hall of Fame coach. And certainly the overall talent that Saban is leaving behind and the fact that he's got a returning quarterback and all those things, this is not a bare cupboard situation. And you're also helped out a little bit, I think, now that it's a 12-team playoff. I would still say no matter who's coaching Alabama, it would be a bit of an upset if Alabama wasn't in the 12-team playoff even without Nick Saban next year. I think it's kind of a good time for the baton to be passed. That's the way that I think Alabama fans would be contemplating things right now.
And Brett McMurphy saying that he's reporting that it is Dan Lanning is the top target at Bama.
That's the best one to me. Another name that popped to mind that they could get right now would be Mike Norvell, who is in a conference that they don't want to be in if you wanted to go that route. Although he's only had the one season of success.
I mean, I would potentially look at Kalen DeBoer and what he's done at Washington. Again, the one thing I will say that people, I am always inclined to go with somebody who's from the region. And people can say, okay, what in the world do you mean by that? Unless you've been to Alabama, I don't think people realize what the job of being a football coach at a place like Alabama is like, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you gotta be on your game all the time. I mean, a good analogy, remember before they hired Nick Saban, they hired Mike Price, and some people will remember this story, but he went out to a strip club.
Pensacola, I think, right?
Expose. Yeah, it's a huge expose on, he came from Washington State. You could get away with a lot. And I think, if Lane Kiffin were talking to us right now, I know Lane pretty well. Lane Kiffin took over at Tennessee, and he had no idea what it was going to be like to be a head coach in the SEC. And you say, okay, well, what do you mean by that? I mean, Lane Kiffin was in L.A. I mean, there are a lot of celebrities in L.A. Lane Kiffin was like, as the USC coach, even as the Raiders coach, you're like the 900th most famous person in the LA area, in the San Francisco Bay Area. Whoever becomes the coach of Alabama is the most famous person in the state of Alabama, and there isn't a close second. And everywhere you go in the state, you go out to dinner, you get swarmed. You go to try to play golf, you get swarmed. You are basically the president of the state of Alabama. And football is just a small part of the role that you have to undertake. It is a all-encompassing style job that even people who love football are not prepared for if they haven't been in that fishbowl. And so, again, it's a lifestyle that is very different from being, even in Nashville. Like the Titans just fired Mike Vrabel. Mike Vrabel can have a normal life, even in a football crazy town and state like Nashville. When you're an SEC coach in a place like Alabama or Knoxville or the Kentucky basketball coach in Lexington, right? There are certain jobs that there is no downtime. where you don't have the ability to ever just be like, hey, man, I just want to chill. You know, I love football, but I don't want to be recruiting all the time. I don't want to be shaking hands, kissing babies all the time. No, that's your job too. And that can weigh on people. And I think Alabama found that to be challenging when they went outside of the SEC culture to try to find it. It takes a unique specimen. And Saban's a little bit different because he's okay with being a jerk, right? I mean, he wasn't willing to necessarily do all the glad handling, and he won so much that he could be kind of standoffish at times. I mean, that's a big job. It's a big one to follow. Look, I kind of did something similar outside of the world of sports. We took over for Rush Limbaugh. Now Rush passed, but typically I talked to a lot of people about it before I took the job. People were like, hey, you're going in after a legend. Now, I was fortunate. I think Buck and I were a tandem, so it's a little bit different. But typically, you don't want to be the guy who follows the legend. You want to be the guy who follows the guy who follows the legend, because the expectations are so high that it's very hard to fulfill them. And that's why I think whoever takes over this Alabama job, it's a prime position. But boy, oh boy, is it jumping into a boiling pot, the likes of which, frankly, there isn't any example of prior. And I'll just point out that it took Alabama 25 years, whatever the math is, from Bear Bryant's death to finding Nick Saban. They spent a generation in the football wilderness trying to find it. So I understand the Alabama fan position of, oh, we'll just go get another guy and plug him in and he's going to be dominant. I'm trying to think of a historical analogy in coaching. Maybe the best one you could point to is Jimmy Johnson to Barry Switzer. If you think about that sort of transition, to me, there's a lot of easier ones where you say, boy, the legend who handed off the baton, there wasn't any championship that followed, and there was a slow regression, where normalcy returned. I just think it's going to be hard to find anybody who can approach the level of success as Nick Saban, no matter who you hire.
Again, for those just joining us on the live stream at OutKick.com/watch, Nick Saban announcing that he is retiring. That report through Chris Lowe at ESPN. Clay Travis with us as we break down the live reaction. Just thinking about this, Clay, if you haven't been to Tuscaloosa, haven't been to Alabama, you don't really know what the feel is. Think about this perspective. So you've got the other SEC schools.
And Clay, if you got to pick your kids up, let us know.
Oh, yeah.
If we're keeping you too long.
Go when you need to go.
Yeah.
But there's just from the mindset of
I'm
the
good.
other.
I'm just trying to share this on I drive,
cool.
so I'm trying not to die. So just give me like 20 seconds,
yeah, it's all
and
good.
I'll be right back.
Well, let me say this, Hutton, before we get this back to Clay. He talked about fit and geography and being from a place mattering in college sports and understanding it. Dan Lanning is from Kansas City. He played his college football at some place called William Jewell College in Missouri.
Okay.
But here's where he has coached over the years. Starting in 2015, he was a GA at Alabama. Then he was inside linebackers coach, recruiting coordinator at Memphis in 2016, 2017. He went from there to Georgia, outside linebackers coach in 2018, and then defensive coordinator and outside linebackers coach 2019 to 21. Got to Oregon in 2022 and has just completed his second year with the Ducks. So the meat of his career right there in the middle took place at Alabama, Memphis, and Georgia. He's 37 years old.
Yeah, I mean, according to McMurphy, he's the
I
top target.
think Dan Lanning could make a lot of sense. And I think he knows the culture well enough. He's obviously had a lot of success at Oregon. The other thing to keep in mind is everybody's going to try to get a raise. And also, whoever gets hired at Alabama is likely to be a head coach, which means you're setting off all different sorts of coaching dominoes, right? When you hire somebody else, there are a lot of elite level coaches that are going to end up potentially looking at this job. And then wherever that coach leaves, I mean, Dan Lanning, if, for instance, he left Oregon, that's a hell of a job. He's returning a pretty decent team. Now, I know Bo Nix is leaving, but Oregon was a top 7 or 8 program this year, and Dan Lanning has recruited at a top 10 level. Remember, it'll be a shot across the bow because Oregon would have lost. Walk me through this if I remember correctly. So they, with Oregon, they had Willie Taggart leave, right, to go to FSU, and then get
Mario
fired.
Cristobal left them.
Mario Cristobal, and now it would be Dan Lanning. So you would lose 3 guys that leave for theoretically different jobs. And also remember, within that context, Oregon is about to go to the Big Ten. So it's not only the change of going to, have to replace a coach, but you're going to have to go to a brand new conference. And remember, we're not that far removed from the early enrollment. And the other wild card here is there basically is perpetual free agency right now in college football. So you're talking about like how many guys that signed with Alabama pretty much only signed with Alabama because of Nick Saban. I would bet a huge percentage. So how many of those guys or Oregon or other top schools are going to be looking around saying, wait a minute, I don't know this is the right spot for me. I know who my head coach is going to be somewhere else. Again, I think all these things, given the transfer portal and everything else, there are just so many different machinations that are now moving and issues to contemplate that would not have been the case in a pre-NIL open transfer portal universe.
And they've got 30 days now. There's an open portal
they can do
now
whatever they
at
want.
Bama. If you're already enrolled, if you sign your national letter of intent, you can get out of that national letter of intent as long as you haven't enrolled in classes to this point.
Taking over for the guy, Clay, over the years. Okay, a few examples here of where it can go one way or the other. You mentioned Alabama. Gene Stallings won the national title in '92. He was there till '96. Bridging Gene Stallings.
Gene Stallings. Sorry to cut you off, but yeah, they had like 5 or 6 guys before Gene Stallings, right?
Well, no, they had 2. Ray Perkins took over for Bear Bryant. Did not do well.
Okay.
Then Bill Curry also did not do well. Then they got to Gene Stallings. So that was the first one. Bear Bryant, 2 coaches to get to Gene Stallings. After Gene Stallings went Mike DeBose, Dennis Francione, Mike Price, who never coached a game because of the strip club scandal, Mike Shula, and then they had Joe Kynes as the interim coach, and then Nick Saban. The name that came to mind for me when you talk about who took over for a legend was Earl Bruce taking over for Woody Hayes, who hung around for about 9 years, but as we know, was not Woody Hayes, which made me think about Michigan with the Ohio State angle of this. We all remember Bo Schembechler, right? Do we remember the tenure of Gary Moeller, who took over for Bo Schembechler, who coached the Wolverines from 90 to 94? And that got them to Lloyd Carr after that. It can go a number of different ways.
Yeah, I can think of another one that's obviously a legend that left, Steve Spurrier. They went and hired Ron Zook. And Ron Zook at Florida, for people who don't remember, was a disaster. But then they went and got Urban, if I'm remembering that order correctly. And that's the whole, you don't want to be the guy after the guy. You want to be the guy after the guy who's after the guy, right? Because then a lot of times they do end up getting it right after the first swing and miss. And so you can think of that kind of having occurred. Obviously, am I correct that there was Jim Tressel and then like kind of a Luke Fickle interregnum, and then Ohio State went and got Urban Meyer? A little bit different, but Jim Tressel won a national championship in '02, and then Urban came and won. Maybe I'm missing some stuff there, but I think that's the trajectory at Ohio State. There just aren't that many legends, because your wife went to Nebraska. Nebraska trying to replace Tom Osborne has been just failure.
Hell, they can't even replace Bo Pelini. They can't replace him, much less Tom Osborne.
Yeah.
They haven't found anyone close to as good as he was.
Was Bill Callahan the first hire after Tom Osborne?
Frank Solich was on his staff and got elevated and took over. And that was the first controversy in Nebraska. Many thought that Frank Solich should not have been fired, and he went on to do good things in Ohio. And then that started the whole carousel of Bill Callahan. It went Solich, Callahan, Pelini, and then a lot of bad stuff since. Maybe good now with Matt Rule.
One, because they're connected with Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll obviously left to go to Seattle, surprised a lot of people. SC, maybe Lincoln Riley is the answer, but USC, since Pete Carroll left, has not been able to figure out their coaching situation, right? I mean, how many years has that been now? Like basically Nick Saban's entire tenure. USC has never been able to figure out who the guy is going to be to replace Pete Carroll. And I would say, USC, Ohio State, Florida, those are the schools that kind of come to mind where you won either a championship or multiple championships and then had a championship coach leave. And I would say probably Ohio State has managed that the best in terms of what they managed to do with Urban Meyer. Now Ryan Day has been pretty good replacing Urban Meyer, but certainly not been able to get over that championship hump.
Pete Carroll.
And maybe, hey, by the way, we're not even talking right now about Jim Harbaugh, who might also leave.
Yeah, right.
And if that happened, you're talking about a Michigan job coming open. I mean, it is just going to be, if you're an agent business, this is probably, the best late Christmas present in your career.
The USC went from Pete Carroll to Lane Kiffin, Ed Orgeron, Clay Helton, Steve Sarkisian, and now Lincoln Riley.
Guys, we've done a lot of shows in the Mid-South across the SEC. Once a month at least, we could take calls. How long is Saban going to be in place? What, 5 more years? We need long-term vision for whatever program. Tennessee, LSU, Ole Miss. Now it's Texas coming in, and if Alabama can still be at the top of the SEC in college football based on their hire, but if they're not, if they screw it up, Texas enters. They can take over that spot. LSU and Brian Kelly, that certainly that's a frenzy now. Learning that
who may want the Michigan job if it opens up also.
But of course, Heupel at Tennessee, and then there's Georgia that just continues to just be the standard, the bar, but just the unreachable expectation. But now you don't have Saban at Bama, and that has been all of the discussion from the fan bases across the SEC. When Saban retires, we're going to be back. And today's that day.
Well, Georgia just loses their chief competitor with Saban. With this.
What you see usually when a legend goes and gives up his coaching is it usually doesn't happen overnight that the team is not very good. In the same way that you had the incremental growth from the new coach, you just start to see a little bit of slippage. And there are so many examples of this where the maniacal focus of Nick Saban that made Alabama so excellent, I think about not only in the world of football, but I think you can go to, for instance, somebody like Pat Summitt when she retires. Because she had Alzheimer's, unfortunately. But the Lady Vols completely fell apart. I think about Dean Smith going to Bill Guthridge at North Carolina. Dean Smith, one of the winningest coaches of all time. And it was a slow
Matt
decline.
Doherty was a disaster. They had a lot of guys. They had a number of failures to get to Roy Williams.
And by the way, sometimes you can be successful immediately just because you're left such a great job. Remember Larry Coker got elevated as the assistant coach at Miami, and they were so incredibly talented. He won, I believe it was a 2001 national title, and then he almost won the 2002 national title.
Lost to Ohio State.
That was the
Jim
call,
Tressel.
late flag pass interference that a lot of Miami fans still don't believe was pass interference. But then they started to slip, right? I think that was coming off of Butch Davis, who had built a really good program. And then he left, if I remember correctly, for Cleveland.
The Browns.
And to take over the Browns. And Bill Larry Coker got the job, and everybody said, see, it's gone really well. And he even went so well that he won the national championship the first year. But the program descent had begun. And that's typically what you see when a legend leaves. Usually, like Alabama's not going to, barring a disaster, suddenly roll the footballs out and go 7-5 or 6-6 in year one without Nick Saban. That would be a stunning collapse. But they might go 9-3. They might go 10-2. Heck, they could go 12-0 and be in the playoffs and maybe even contend for the championship again. When you really start to see it's year 2, year 3, when the maniacal focus begins to just start to show some of those breaches in the dam, so to speak, become more pronounced.
Seen just pouring in with a lot of the Bama fans on social, just sadness, I think. And also, you're right, just honoring the coach. 297 wins for Nick Saban, 4 Heisman Trophy winners, 10 SEC championships. and 8 playoff appearances in the 10 years since the inception, as he retires as a
legend.
6-time championship-winning head coach.
Greatest college coach ever.
And one at LSU, and what a legacy. What a legacy, and what a ripple effect just from the landscape of college football.
And I think the LSU portion of this is what really, to me, puts him over as definitively the greatest coach in college history, because he did it at 2 different places and won that 01 national championship at LSU.
Clay, we are
03 national championship.
One last thing, too.
Yep.
I mean, there's a lot of talk about Saban, Belichick as the best coaches, college and pro. Remember that Saban coached against Belichick 4 times because the Dolphins are in the same division as the New England Patriots. Head-to-head, Nick Saban went 2-2 against Bill Belichick, even when Bill Belichick had Tom Brady and Saban had nowhere near that talent at the quarterback spot. So some people will denigrate Nick Saban's accomplishments and say, oh, yeah, he was great, but it's college. It's not that big of a deal. I always think it's kind of interesting to say, okay, head-to-head coaching against each other, even without Tom Brady in the NFL, Nick Saban was able to go head-to-head. And one of the great unanswered questions of all of football in general, remember that the Miami Dolphins team doctor refused to sign off on Drew Brees.
Yeah.
They were making the decision about who to sign as a free agent. He signed off on Dante Culpepper instead. If Nick Saban had gotten Drew Brees, I think there is a multiverse out there where Nick Saban never leaves the NFL, wins several Super Bowls with Miami Dolphins. Sorry, Dolphins fan. So, some of those decisions that don't necessarily impactful, strong argument that the decision of who the Miami Dolphins signed for quarterback back in 2006 or 7 or whatever the heck it was, ended up creating.
Clay, thanks for hopping on, man, as we wrap up. This just reacting in real time to Saban announcing his retirement and the report from Chris Lowe that popped about 50 minutes ago. We'll certainly have reaction tomorrow as well, starting at 4 o'clock Eastern.
Quickly, our buddies at Next Round Live,
Yep.
Jim Dunaway and Ryan Brown, just said, I've said pretty much from early on in his time at Oregon that Dan Lanning would be Nick Saban's replacement. And we are more confident in saying that now after having some conversations with people that he will be the replacement for Nick Saban.
Our thanks to Clay Travis for joining us. The legacy, the dynasty of Nick Saban retiring, 17 seasons. And, man, what a career. We'll react to it tomorrow. Hot Mic with Hutton and Withrow.
So much to discuss.
OutKick Network right here at OutKick.com.